So humanity has all kinds of inherently noble qualities. We've created art and music, we've unravelled the mysteries of mathematics and science, and also somewhere in between we invented tacos. But there's a lot more to be proud of. By the same token, we also fumble the ball in a lot of ways, none more egregious than with our more violent, xenophobic and territorial tendencies. On a mass scale, these lead to war and great suffering, but on a smaller, more micro scale, they lead to much more focused and bizarre conflicts in the form of turf wars. For example, consider number 10, South Africa's taxi turf wars, which have claimed hundreds of lives. Cab drivers have a less than stellar reputation pretty much everywhere on earth, even though it's probably just a minority who stand out as rude or deceptive or downright dangerous to their customers. Let us know in the comments, your worst experience with a taxi driver. I have many. But things get ugly when a place gets big enough to have competition between cabbies and cab companies. For example, in South Africa, like anywhere, cab companies have a finite customer base. They want to hold those customers and, more importantly, the money they have as tightly as they can. But if another cab company shows up, all those customers and their money might be seduced away by better service and lower prices. That is how a turf war starts, and the one in South Africa has been going on for decades, and people have genuinely died as a result of it. For example, in 2018, a minibus full of cab drivers was returning from the funeral of a colleague when a gunman opened fire, killing all 11 passengers. By July 2021, 83 people had been killed in Cape Town alone, including passengers. These were just some of the victims in a war that has claimed hundreds of lives. Between 2000 and 2017, 43% of assassinations in South Africa were related to the taxi industry. That was far more than politically motivated hits or organised crime-related murders, which both accounted for 22%. Both of them combined. The South African cab business is, to put it frankly, huge. Annual revenue is around $1.2 billion and 15 million people per day use cabs. Long commuter trips between cities are common, and this, along with permit disputes, are what the turf wars focus on and have focused on since the 1990s. Number 9. Glasgow had deadly ice cream truck wars. Like taxis, ice cream trucks are a vehicle that offer a service to customers for money. Unlike taxis, these cater mostly to children or families and are arguably very wholesome and fun. That's the theory anyway. In Glasgow, things worked differently in the 1980s. Despite the name, the ice cream truck wars in Glasgow were like mobile markets. They sold groceries and other essential items in neighbourhoods that were too far from grocery stores for many residents to reach easily. Notably, they went to a neighbourhood called the Rushazi, which was built in the 50s but had fallen into a state of poverty and unemployment. There were huge profits to be made if your truck got there first to sell to residents. That made drivers quite territorial. For example, consider the following tale where a driver of one of these ice cream trucks was intimidated by some unknown assailants who shot at him in his truck on his rounds. He escaped unharmed, but later they set his house on fire. The fire which killed all the people inside, including an 18-month-old baby. Arrests were made, but appeals went on for years based on very shady police work, including at least one cop signing off on a confession he got when it was later revealed he was driving somewhere in his car at the time the confession was given. The cops acting terribly. Who'd have guessed it? 20 years passed with some legal challenges and evidence showing cops conspire to frame suspects, leaving the case unsolvable after so much time. And you probably guessed as well, the trucks also sold quite a lot of drugs. In case it wasn't, obvious from the fact organised crime were involved. Number 8. Manuka honey is at the centre of a honey turf war in New Zealand. Honey is one of those things like vinegar or olive oil that can get very expensive if it's artisanal or from some rare and fancy source. Manuka honey in particular fits the bill here. It's originally made in New Zealand with nectar from the Manuka tree, and back in 2016, 250 grams of it could cost up to $30, and the price has only gone up since. Since Manuka took off as a so-called superfood, it's been highly in demand, and this has led to honey turf wars. As the market exploded and prices rose, producers of the honey endured high thefts and vandalism. And let's just give shout outs here to the criminals who were stealing entire hives of bees. Bees were poisoned, and in one case, 300 apiaries consisting of tens of thousands of bees were killed in New Zealand. Now, a big part of the issue is between New Zealand and producers in Australia. They fight over the name and the right to use it because in the marketplace, the value is all in the name Manuka. Think of it like champagne, which is a designated area of origin. If one person owns the rights, then the copycats have to come up with a new term, and that new term isn't as valuable. But even within New Zealand, as more and more apiaries are opening up to compete over the very limited resource, the vandalism and even physical beatings continue to try and get as big a piece of that honey pie as possible. And I'm only reminded of like similar things happen in Canada with maple syrup. And no doubt someone's going to go down to the comments now and talk about the Canada maple syrup heists that happen. So I'll just tell that now so you don't have to scroll down. You can stay looking at my beautiful mug. And that's not hyperbole, by the way. In Canada, you literally have like organized groups of criminals, fast and furiousing, like giant trucks full of maple syrup. Because maple syrup is just worth that much, apparently, in Canada. I think they even have a type of maple syrup called like Buck a Drop, which is like so expensive, like one drop costs $1, which is, I'm guessing it must be good. It has to be, right? Number 7, Kennedy Fried Chicken restaurants are constantly at war by independent owners. Have you ever enjoyed some KFC? Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, mind you. Everyone knows Kentucky Fried Chicken, but Kennedy Fried Chicken. It's a New York chicken franchise, sort of, in which none of the different Kennedy Fried Chicken restaurants actually have anything to do with one another beyond all ripping each other off like an Ouroboros of chicken theft. Kennedy, along with others like Crown Fried Chicken and Royal Fried Chicken, have all nearly identical menus, and the restaurants mostly look exactly the same. Nearly all are independently owned. Abdul Hay owns the trademark to Kennedy, but he didn't even create it. He worked in one, then opened his own, and then tried to stake his claim. Ballsy for sure, but not exactly legal. Despite not creating the restaurant himself, Hay threatened to sue everybody else running a Kennedy, of which there are about 300. And none of these restaurants have anything to do with one another, save for the fact they all seem to be run by Afghani immigrants, which is true of Hay and the man he originally worked for, who started the original Kennedy Fried Chicken. Starting your own Kennedy is considered to be something of a tradition for many Afghani immigrants, so they are defiant in the face of a potential lawsuit. This may be because they've already sort of triumphed over the actual original KFC, because Kentucky Fried Chicken pursued legal action against the restaurants back in the day, but none paid attention when the KFC went straight to the initials, and they lost their footing to dispute with Kennedy. But moving on, but sticking in New York, we have number 6. New York has soft serve ice cream wars. So we already saw that Glasgow had ice cream wars, but so did New York. And these ones were literally over ice cream. Soft serve trucks from Mr. Softee and the New York Ice Cream Company regularly square off in the summer months in a feud that dates back to 2013, when New York Ice Cream Company was founded by a former Mr. Softee employee. Mr. Softee has gone all out to spy on their rival, even hiring private investigators to make sure they're not stealing Softee's jingle or swirly mascot. And while that may seem like a little paranoid, maybe a bit overkill, it's not, because New York Ice Cream Company has been pulling out all the stops and even pulling out baseball bats on occasions on their rival. So New York Ice Cream Company was started specifically to compete with Mr. Softee, and their trucks use the same colours to start and use the name Master Softee, which is somehow worse than my last name and got them sued. Master Softee got banned. A year later, the company came back and was called the New York Ice Cream Company and started getting intimidating and even violent with the competition. The New York Ice Cream Company lost another suit, was banned from parts of Midtown, and had to stop using the jingle. But the ban ended in 2017 and the rivalry sparked up once again. Just every summer, the ice cream wars continue. Number 5. London has gang-run hot dog wars. London, England is not so different from New York when it comes to food rivals. Hot dog carts in the capital are sometimes operated by gangs, and they don't take kindly to competition. Back in the 90s, this peaked with incidents involving Albanian hot dog vendors pulling out machetes. You wouldn't think buying a hot dog would be that dangerous, but apparently so. Many vendors work for a shady boss who takes a massive cut in exchange for the cart and supplies. Sellers are tightly restricted geographically, with city licensing workers sometimes going as far as patrolling streets all night, just waiting for a vendor to cross over nearly your corner so the cart can be seized. And when rival sellers get too close to one another, they can break down into violent attacks wielding iron bars or sticks, or, as mentioned, machetes. In most cases, it's immigrants like the Albanians working for established criminal organisations who apparently have a monopoly on hot dogs in London. And because many of these immigrants are unable to work legally in England, they are forced basically to work for the shady hot dog cartel. And even in cases where people are able to go legit and sell them legal hot dogs, they still find themselves having to pay protection money to the gangs, the hot dog cartel. Number 4, Chicago newspapers went through bloody circulation wars in the 1900s. Turf wars are not modern, and Chicago was in the middle of a newspaper turf war started by William Randolph Hearst back in the early 1900s. He published a paper called The Chicago American and had designs on crushing the Tribune and Record Herald. And these were by no means idle threats. Hearst employed honest-to-goodness thugs, and I quote, prize fighters, bouncers, muggers, and other street athletes, and armed them to the teeth with weapons like guns and brass knuckles. And their only real job was to find the people who distributed rival papers and convince them to make room for Hearst's paper. This led to more than one fistfight and even a shootout at a Chicago newsstand. The rival newspapers responded in kind, and this eventually resulted in newspaper trucks being driven into rivers. The feud went on for years. Number 3. Vegas wedding chapels have had violent confrontations over customers. The Las Vegas Wedding Chapel is an iconic Vegas experience, second only to the casinos themselves. The idea of a quickie in-and-out wedding has a lot of appeal to those seeking the full, seedy Las Vegas experience. My cousin got married in Las Vegas, and he's divorced now, so he had the full experience. But as with all things Vegas, there's money to be made and lost, which leads to rivalry. In the early 2000s, for example, Lily of the Valley Ministries had to request an order of protection from the Garden of Love Chapel because of threats and harassment directed at employees and customers. The Garden of Love is one of the most famous chapels in all of Las Vegas. 2 years earlier, there were death threats and vandalism running rampant. Owners of one chapel might curse out couples who chose another chapel, and people's cars were being pelted with paintballs. And at the centre of the accusations was, once again, Garden of Love, because nothing says celebrating the sanctity of marriage like whipping out a paintball gun. Number 2. Chinatown bus rivalries led to drive-bys and stabbings. The last thing anyone wants to experience on a bus is a drive-by. Like, that's some Grand Theft Auto stuff right there, and that's how bad things got in the early 2000s when competition between Chinatown bus companies offering curbside service up and down the East Coast got, to put it lightly, kind of ugly. The first company started offering $25 trips to Boston, but competition horned in and prices dropped in an effort to entice customers. Some offers fares as low as $10, which led to fistfights between rival employees. And it's like, why did they care? This is the thing about all these stories. Like, why do the employees care? It'd be like a McDonald's employee walking to a Burger King and just starting some stuff. Like, why do they care? Unless they're getting like kickbacks or something, it makes no sense to me. Like, who cares that much about the company they work for? Actually, no, I shouldn't say that, because I really care about top 10s. Don't fire me. In 2003, one driver left his employer to form his own company and was later gunned down in the street. Later, this escalated to arsons, a stabbing, and, of course, more shootings. And finally, number 1, Canada has a massive tow truck turf war problem. Despite their reputation as being polite, Canadians are far from immune to angry turf wars as well. Canada's disputes exist in a world of tow trucks, complete with ties to organised crime, and of course, murder. In 2020, for example, Toronto police laid out 200 charges in response to a long-standing war between rival companies. Not that this really did anything to stop what was going on. And the turf wars reportedly date back to at least the early 2000s and have decayed to not just unauthorized tows, but extreme violence, including arson, drugs, weapons, and multiple killings. And the cops, surprisingly, are partially to blame here. So the main issue is that there's almost no regulation within the business, and police often call a tow truck on a first-come, first-served basis for accidents. And this can result in rivals literally racing to the scene of a crime to tow a wreck. And because they use police scanners, trucks can very often sometimes beat the police to a scene of an accident and tow it before the cops can arrive and figure out what's going on. Also, there's the obvious of police being charged with extortion and bribery as well, often getting involved in what is a lucrative industry that involves kickbacks from auto repair shops and others, all at the expense of the drivers who just want their cars to get fixed. So I hope everybody out there found this video to be entertaining, informative, and educational. I certainly found it to be all three of those things, if not a little surprising when just out of nowhere murders came in. But if you did happen to enjoy the video, why not go give the author a follow on social media, Ian Forte. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. And I would also appreciate people following me on social media or checking out my other channels, Fact Fiend and Wiki Weekends. But, you know, just for the most part, like the video if you liked it, leave comments and feedback and suggestions in the comment section below, and subscribe for more content like this. And as I always like to say, everybody out there, have the day you deserve. And I guess, you know, just to end on, if you have any, like, you know, just minor, petty squabbles that have not, you know, gone out into like all-out turf wars, but, you know, those hills, those tiny hills that you will die on, in defense of, like, you know, something that's just otherwise quite mundane, let us know, because I'm sure other people will be interested to hear about it. Cheers.